Bom dia a todos. Bom dia aos sobreviventes aí. Estamos começando o terceiro dia do nosso 23º Seminário Internacional de Defesa da Concorrência, do IBRAC. Dentre as excelentes ideias que o presidente Caminati teve para tornar mais especial essa edição do nosso seminário, está o convite para o professor William Kovacic passar a semana conosco aqui. E eu tenho essa satisfação pessoal de poder fazer a apresentação dele para a conferência. Na verdade, nós havíamos planejado que o ex-presidente do CAD, Gessner Oliveira, fizesse essa apresentação, mas quando nós fomos convidá-lo para fazer isso, infelizmente, ele já tinha um outro compromisso. Mas nós tínhamos pensado nele justamente porque o Gessner foi quem trouxe o Kovacic para o Brasil pela primeira vez. Isso aconteceu em agosto de 1998. E, para mim, foi o meu primeiro contato com o professor Kovacic, porque após passar uma semana no CAD, conversando com os conselheiros da época sobre desenvolvimento de defesa da concorrência, que é algo que ele faz bastante pelo mundo afora, ele foi para São Paulo participar de uma das aulas do professor Gessner, da AGV, e eu, que tinha acabado de voltar do PINCAD, o professor Gessner convidou para participar dessa aula, e eu tive o prazer, e lembro muito bem dessa aula. O professor falava sobre a organização institucional dos órgãos de defesa da concorrência versus reguladores setoriais, e tendo tanto tempo, quase 20 anos dessa data, e eu lembrar bem, mostra a didática e o impacto que o professor causa nos alunos, ainda que os alunos por um dia, como eu fui. Então, uma satisfação muito grande para mim, pessoal, estar aqui. O professor Kovacic foi a minha primeira referência internacional e estou muito feliz de ter conseguido dar certo do professor estar aqui. Muito bem. O professor Kovacic dispensa a apresentação. Na verdade, nas palavras do Juliano Basile, que é um jornalista importante aqui no Brasil, o professor Kovacic é uma instituição para o Antitrust Internacional. Ele é professor na Universidade de George Washington e foi, além disso, comissário e chairman da Federal Trade Commission dos Estados Unidos. E se o antitrust fosse uma religião, nós poderíamos tranquilamente dizer que o professor Kovacic é um profeta. Ele roda o mundo pregando a importância da defesa da concorrência para o vigor econômico dos países e foi contratado e deu consultoria para dezenas de países na implantação ou na reforma dos seus respectivos sistemas de defesa da concorrência. Além disso, o professor Kovacic, se vocês fizerem o que eu fiz essa manhã só para conferir algo que eu já sabia, digitarem Antitrust da Amazon, na categoria livros, é um dos primeiros hits. A obra do A Nutshell, do professor Kovacic. Então, ele realmente dispensa qualquer tipo de apresentação. Nas palavras do Juliano Basile, é realmente uma instituição e nós somos muito gratos por ter a oportunidade de ter o professor aqui conosco durante a semana. Tem sido muito proveitoso. E com isso, eu passo a palavra para o professor, que vai falar sobre um tema absolutamente atual para a realidade brasileira: concorrência, corrupção e licitações públicas.
Thank you, Marcio. I think that all of you may realize that those of us who have the opportunity to work with you learn more from you than you do from us. Unmistakably, it has been a bilateral education and enrichment. And as anyone who's been a teacher knows, one of the great pleasures of being at Vargas that day and spending time with you, with Jesner, is to see the vision of a better life, to see the promise of the future in the faces of capable, hardworking, dedicated, enthusiastic young people. Young people have become a bit older, but indeed, indeed are the very foundation of a good system. And yesterday, again, we saw that in the faces of all the young people who were here. And that gives you a sense of hope and confidence that brutally difficult problems can be addressed successfully. So thank you for the inspiration you give back to all of us. If you had had an auction for the program, I would have bid a lot to be here. I'm going to talk about competition, corruption, and public procurement. And to go about it basically in the following way. I want to talk a little bit about where car wash fits into the larger global program of competition law cases, and to underscore for you why I think it is an especially important matter, not just for Brazil, but for the larger global community. To then say a bit about why we care so much about procurement, why there has been a decided trend, and I would say the past 10 to 15 years, on the part of competition agencies to devote more resources to this field of interest and to treat it as an ever more important priority. To then speak about the difficulties associated with being active in this area and taking on issues that implicate systems of public integrity, and to look at corruption as a collateral focus of competition law, why that is difficult and in many instances dangerous, and particularly hard for a competition system to take on, and then to offer some suggested solutions about how to make involvement in this area very important. My general observation and conclusion is that this is a most worthy area for public authorities in the field of competition law to be active, and that there is a strong potential anti-corruption dividend that comes from the enforcement of competition laws involving misconduct in the area of public procurement. But nothing about it is easy. I don't think I have to convince this audience of how difficult the engagement in that area of the work is, because it brings the competition authority into a neighborhood that is very rough, very difficult, where the sensitivity of everything it does is accentuated. So this is an area that I would call very high prospective gain, but very great danger as well, and potential loss. But I'll talk about how to realize the gains, but to mitigate the hazards of doing that. I'm giving you my views only, not those of the Competition and Markets Authority in the United Kingdom, but my views are very much shaped by my experience working with that excellent agency and looking at the increasing effort they are dedicating to working with public procurement officials and with public prosecutors who have a mandate to deal with corruption and serious fraud. In going about this, I'm drawing on work with a number of colleagues. Rob Anderson at the World Bank, Alison Jones, my colleague at King's in London, Marianela Lopez-Galdos, one of my PhD students, who's now working with a think tank in Washington, but is doing lots of work with Allison and I in this area, and Anna Caroline Mueller, who's Rob's colleague at the World Bank. I think it's no accident, again, that you see increasing collaborations involving researchers who are interested in, separately, corruption, competition law, public administration, and public expenditures. This has been an encouraging area where you've seen a convergence of interests and collaboration across disciplines, political science, economics, law, public administration, that is not natural or inevitable in the field of research, but you see those collaborations taking place at more and more academic hubs around the world with, I think, fruitful results for policymakers, some of which I'll identify for us today. Where does car wash stand in the larger scheme of our experience with competition law? I'd assert to you it's one of the most important cases that any agency, anywhere, at any time has ever brought. For several reasons. How to measure, what's at stake. At home, not simply the performance of the public procurement process, but arguably the performance of the political system itself. The case goes to the very heart of government decision-making and the relationship between public and private actors. I don't think that CAJE thought that's where it was going when it opened this door. But that's where the path has led, right to the heart of governance in the country. So much so that it is a case unlike any other that an agency has brought that calls into question the entire system of governance, as well as the functioning of a key area of public expenditure. That would be plenty right there. That would pay the rent in terms of importance. But notice the extraordinary spillovers across the entire region. This has not simply become a matter of interest for Brazil, but count for yourselves the number of countries in Latin America that have been deeply affected, the huge ripples that have spilled across the border into other jurisdictions where the identification of this conduct has set in motion inquiries involving other jurisdictions where the same actors were involved and potentially with the same effect on the political process. That is, what could happen in a chain reaction-like way across the continent is a re-examination of governance and a re-examination of the way in which governments collect money, spend it, and the way in which public institutions function. That's an extraordinary accomplishment. Last, as we have been hinting, as Richard and I mentioned earlier, this is a matter of global concern. Not to be too dramatic, but I'd assert to you that competition agencies across the world are following this intently. They're following it because of the economic significance of the case itself, but they're seeing day by day what happens when the anti-corruption machine starts to run and how it can put the competition agency in a very sensitive and delicate realm of policymaking, and how it can set in motion various political forces that in some ways can endanger the operation of the competition system. So I'd tell you in my conversations just within the past 6 months, the number of heads of agencies who've said, we watch this all the time. And yes, in part it scares us because we're not quite sure how we will formulate a program that will enable us to withstand the kind of backlash that inevitably comes when you take on matters that are so fundamental and difficult. So this is a matter not just important for Brazil, for the hemisphere, but for the global arena of competition agencies. As Richard and I suggested before, if you look at the experience with competition law since 1990, 100 new systems. Pause for a second. That hasn't happened in any other area of economic policymaking. We've never had a setting in which so many countries in such a short period of time have either adopted new laws in a particular area or dramatically reformed older laws. There's no parallel for this in the field in which we're interested and active. And within that arena, there are a handful of jurisdictions and systems that stand out for the way in which they have been able to make progress and succeed in initial conditions that were not entirely favorable. It's a handful you're familiar with. It's South Africa and the continent of Africa. It is Brazil here. It's Mexico. It's Chile in Latin America, to take just a few here. But to go into Asia, it's Singapore. In South Asia, what will happen with the renovated system in India? Indeed, it's China. But it's a small list of countries that in many ways are benchmarks. They're bellwethers. They're barometers for how the system is developing. In this region, if competition law cannot succeed in Brazil, it will not succeed in the continent. And if Brazil can't be successful, there's real doubt about whether it will work in the other 99 and to be successful there. So in this arena, what happens here is examined very carefully abroad, especially this case. So where would I put this case in terms of its importance today? I think it is as important as any other case being run anywhere else today. We could have a debate about Google, for example, which is important for the future of the IT system and competition law. It's a worthy contender for the honor of being the most important, no doubt. But I'd be willing to stand on a platform with anyone and say, for the reasons I've just mentioned, car wash is as important as that case today. In other words, no more important case in the world today. Years ago, I read an interview given by the curator for the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, and he's interviewed by a journalist who says, do you have the best collection of art in the world? He says, well, there are a lot of good ones, a lot of great museums, it's hard to say. And he paused and said, I can assure you of one thing, we are not the second. I would assure you in one thing, car wash is not the second. Let's even take a broader perspective and ask, since 1889, with the first national experiment with competition law in Canada, and carry it forward today, how many cases anywhere at any time have been more important than this one? We don't know how this one ends yet. There's a long way to go. But Standard Oil of New Jersey, Hoffman LaRoche, take your pick, Constant, Grundig, which cases are more important? Formulate your own top 10. I think you can make a strong case that this is a top 10 case of all time, given the stakes involved and what it can mean. So, this is no small matter for an agency that is barely 25 years old. This is a big deal. Why do we care about procurement? Why is it an especially important arena in which to consider questions of competition and questions of corruption? The first and foremost is the money. It's huge. It's immense. Depending on the jurisdiction, total GDP expenditures running from 10% of all GDP up to 40 or 50% in some countries. In my country, it's about 17% of GDP. What's GDP? It's about $16 trillion. That's a lot of money. And what happens when there's a lot of money lying around to be spent? Who's interested? Public officials and the firms that will receive the funds. And you have the possibility for all kinds of unseemly arrangements that will determine where the money goes. There's just so much of it. And by nature, it tends to be spread through expenditure that takes place in such a decentralized way that there are many openings for corrupt bargains to be made. It's hard to monitor, there's so much of it, and it is so attractive. In a sense, for a bank robber, it's the biggest bank there is that's readily accessible. Second, the economic harm, if you screw it up, is enormous. The possibilities for harm where the funds are being spent for crucial infrastructure projects. You're building the schools, you're building the hospitals, the roads, the ports, the airports, and you're providing vital social services for things such as national health care systems. You're buying medicines that determine whether or not people live or die. You're buying texts for students in school. You're purchasing, in many instances, vital infrastructure, investments, and social services. You know about the debate about whether competition law cares enough about inequality, whether it should do more to correct instances of economic disadvantage. You're familiar with that debate. To the extent that competition law has been interested in this, and it has for a long time, it's been there. Where can you find an area where so systematically distortions in the way the money has been spent adversely affects the second half of the demographic with respect to income and other crucial sources of individual growth and mobility? I would suggest to you that the areas in which the misspending of funds have been so damaging land most heavily on the shoulders of the have-nots rather than the haves. Schools, healthcare programs, vital infrastructure investments. Yes, do people of means get some benefit from that? Was I delighted to walk through the airport in Las Campinas to see the renovated airport in Brasilia? You bet, and with envy. Living in a third world country as I do, with a third world airport called Dulles International Airport, I can assure you, and there are others, LAX. I'm sorry to use these curse words for an audience here. JFK. I'll stop doing this. These are vulgar terms known well to all of you. It wouldn't be worth it if it weren't for the generous and friendly disposition of our immigration officials. So do come back. It is, yes, those of us at the upper echelons of the income spectrum, we benefit from that. But far and away, in most instances, the people who get it right in the neck if the procurement system fails are the people who are dispossessed or have less. So, tremendous economic harm, and I would say especially serious harm for people of lesser means or serious disadvantage. Last, if this system fails in a vivid way, there's nothing that more effectively entrenches cynicism about the functioning of government than wasting the money. Why? People pay taxes. That's a sensitive issue. They see money collected by governance, and if they see it thrown away, if they see it skimmed, stolen, ripped off, what do they think about their government? Two things. Everybody cheats. It's all corrupt. And nothing that public officials do is honest. And if there's a bit of it, there's a suspicion that everybody's in on it. If you want to entrench a view of public administration that says it is worthless, that it can't do the job well, watch the money get stolen and misapplied. It takes a long time for a government to build trust with its citizens, doesn't it? To create a sense of confidence that these people are serving our interests. It takes one episode of misconduct to liquidate that pool of goodwill. It's gone in a minute. And try to fill the vessel back up again and how long it takes. I'll give you an example of this. This is Fat Leonard. Fat Leonard is Leonard Francis. He is a Malaysian citizen who operates a shipping services company that provides assistance to vessels as they travel through Asia. Among the many vessels who do that are American warships and supply ships. He began by cultivating relationships with U.S. procurement officials to induce them, among other things, to locate ships in ports where he had service facilities. In part, he said, I provide good services. But what were the crucial means for his persuasion? Envelopes filled with $100 bills, the most popular currency of corruption around the world. The 100 is pretty nice. Most places will cash it for you. Banks will take it. There's a $1,000 bill, but that looks a little bit suspicious. The 100 is right in the sweet spot. Big envelopes of $100 bills. Luxurious trips with the most elegant hotels and accommodations, food, beverage that you can imagine. And of course, in the grand tradition of corruption, prostitutes. Teams of them. Who were they provided to? They were provided to U.S. naval officers, senior officers, who would give Fat Leonard data about where U.S. warships were traveling. By the way, that isn't posted on the front page of newspapers in the United States. That's sensitive information. Where the submarine's going, where the aircraft carrier's going, that's not a matter of public record. That's very sensitive. Fat Leonard bought that. And by giving inducements to naval officers and top officials, would induce them to port the vessels where he was. Estimates of how much he stole over a period of 10 years, probably at the low side, 200 million, maybe as much as 400 million, people still working on it. Who are the victims? I'm going to show you a photograph of Commander Mike Misowich. Mike Misowich, in many ways, is a remarkable and ennobling human being. He was able to escape the deprivations of Pol Pot in the last days of the slaughter in the killing fields in Cambodia. He got out. He comes to the United States. He's adopted by a family. He works hard. He goes to good schools. He gets into the Navy and becomes the commander of a major warship. He makes a famous visit back to Cambodia, where for the first time he returns to his country as a naval officer, and he is greeted by friends and relatives for the first time. It's an astonishing clip of tape that shows the local boy making good and coming home after a horrible ordeal where he ultimately succeeds. He is seduced by Fat Leonard. Fat Leonard pays him off and takes him on a horrifying path. This is Mike. That's Mike in a bordello. He is surrounded by a group of young women, not his wife. He seems to be having a good time. Who paid for it? Fat Leonard. And Fat Leonard did this with one individual after another. It became known. They were prosecuted. Mike's in prison now, along with a half dozen other senior naval officers from the rank of captain commander up to a one-star admiral. This ran for over a decade. And imagine what it does to the public confidence, and this is right off of the front page of the Washington Post some months ago. When people see that, and they look at this guy, and they see what's happened, try to persuade someone that procurement at the Department of Defense is not corrupt shot through all the way. Try to persuade them that this is all worthwhile. This is what you get when the system goes bad. It's fatal, it's poison, and it's hard to recover. How can competition law push back? First and foremost, it can attack the collusive schemes that are very popular and have been since the beginning of time dealing with public procurement. The early competition law cases brought by the Department of Justice feature a striking number of bid rotation schemes. You win this one, I win the next one, our friends win the third, then we go back and repeat the cycle again. Standard arrangement. To the extent that competition law can attack those directly, that's a valuable way of avoiding a serious distortion in the way governments purchase goods and services. Another key element of many competition laws is a specific prohibition that says the government shall not give exclusive rights except in unusual circumstances to individual providers. It won't do it. Good example from the government of Georgia. Within the first 5 years of the operation of the Georgian competition law. They heard a complaint from a company that wanted to provide services at the main airport in Tbilisi, basically a gift shop. They wanted to open a shop, and they were told by the airport authority, sorry, we've got one. What do you mean you have one? We've given an exclusive franchise to one company. They went to the Georgian Competition Authority, which goes through the text and says, there's a specific provision that says the government cannot do that. They brought it to the attention of the agency, they brought it to the attention of the Justice Ministry, and the contract was dissolved. What do you suppose sat behind that agreement? Was this just a neutral tendering process where they happened to pick the best? There was a bribe there. And what did the competition law do? It basically said you can't enforce the bribe. You can't enforce the contract. Now, it's an illicit contract. This wouldn't be in the courts. But indirectly, the application of the competition law struck specifically at a corrupt scheme behind the airport authority and a specific firm that had said, I'll pay you. I'll kick back money if you give me the exclusive rights. And a competition law might not be intended initially to have that effect, but when it comes to the behavior of public agencies, that can be a valuable side effect of the operation of the law. The role as advocate. telling procurement authorities how to do their job better, telling the government to be suspicious of grants of exclusive rights where they aren't dictated, where they're not necessary, explaining to them what happens when you engage in behavior that's going to give a chokehold to individual suppliers. One of the early projects I worked on was in Morocco. And we were looking at areas in which there were possibilities from growth. We spent a lot of time talking to Moroccan agricultural firms that grew ornamental flowers. Pretty flowers, and the aim was we're going to put them on airplanes, send them to the continent in Europe, and the next day they'll be sitting on the tables of Europeans, they'll be in offices, they'll be in displays, and we can make really nice flowers. But we're having a lot of trouble. First, we are facing what looks to be a trucking cartel that dramatically raises the price of getting to the airport. 2, there is an airport freight forwarding service that is licensed by, yes, the Public Airport Authority, and there's one of them. They've given a single license so that for everything related to freight forwarding, arranging insurance, doing the packaging, dealing with customs, there's one. And it means that when we finally do get our flowers on the plane and offloaded in Europe, we're facing a stunning cost disadvantage, 20 to 30%. That means that, yes, we sell some, we make really good flowers, but the volume falls way off. We did a bit of a study of this and said, if you don't eliminate this cascade of restrictions, the private trucking cartel, the publicly encouraged monopolist operating at the airport in Rabat and Casablanca, you will not realize the growth and expansion of this sector. Especially on the public airport arrangement, where did the exclusive contract come from? It was a kickback. The party granting the contract provided a kickback. This was in the day before the Moroccan agency had really begun to function as a self-standing institution, but assisted in doing a study that told the government, if you don't want this ag sector to grow, if you don't care about growth, then do nothing. Leave it in place, please. Don't touch it. But if you'd like to see this sector expand, we have some ideas about how to do it. And the competition agency, as a research instrument, put very useful information in front of the government. They changed the policy. Could they compel the change? No. But the basic question posed in their report is, would you like to be richer or poorer? Would you like the country to be richer or poorer? It's just like that. It's not a trick question. And in the abstract, many people say, richer is better. Yes. And that was the choice, ultimately, that the government made. It's not that governments always, when confronted with powerful, compelling empirical evidence, will make wise choices. But it makes it harder to explain away a manifestly irresponsible decision when you put those numbers on the table and let people stare at them for a while. Explain to me in a page of paper why poor will be better here. And it's not an acceptable answer to say our friends, buddies, and companions are getting kickbacks that make this work. The last thing for an agency is that it can dramatically assist in raising its profile with society in a way that creates support. Competition law, what does it mean? Who does it? How many citizens understand it? It's very sobering to see how hard it is to bring that across. One of the only ways that you can build that awareness is to do things that people understand. It's interesting to watch the way that the Department of Justice, thank you for your technical assistance. It's wonderful, an oasis, and suddenly there's the lovely water. That's much better. The Department of Justice, and this was part of, Marcelo went through some of this history on the first plenary session on Wednesday. The Department of Justice gets a greatly augmented criminal enforcement mandate in 1974. It converts the offense from what's called a misdemeanor to a felony. The felony is more serious. It means, among other things, you can't vote again. You're excluded from voting in elections. There are a whole host of jobs you can't have. Now, the misdemeanor was bad enough. If you're interviewing for a job and you see a line on the resume, convicted of a misdemeanor, and the employer says, what's this about? You say, oh, it's only a misdemeanor. It's a minor criminal offense, but I think I'm worthy of a position of trust with your law firm. The misdemeanor offense was not an attractive career-boosting feature. The felony was much more deadly serious, and it came with more severe criminal penalties. So the law's been upgraded. How do you put it into place? Because I think in every country, and by the way, only a handful have made good on the promise of criminal enforcement. You can count them like this and have a couple of fingers left over. 30 systems in the world today with criminal sanctions, maybe 3 or 4 that are making progress and making it work. Maybe. Why? It's a hard social norm to get across. When people think of serious crime, what do they think about? They think about people with ski masks, revolvers, and bank robbery. Or human trafficking in slaves. Things of that kind. Serious offenses to individuals and to property, to human safety. Price fixing. What's that? Why should I care? I've got the bank robbers, the terrorists, the drug dealers over here, and there's a big queue of them. And you want me to spend time on price fixing? Antitrust? Where's the popular support going to come from? And part of what the Department of Justice was concerned with in trials, jury trials, is convincing them that it mattered. Because who was the typical defendant? It looked like me. An old guy, no tattoos, very humble suit, short haircut, going gray, sitting there, threat to society? No. And the lawyer would say, do you want to put Bill in jail for this obscure offense? Why? And to throw him into a pen with the real bad guys, does that make sense? And the concern was a lot of jurors would say no. Or if they said yes reluctantly, the judge would say 2-year sentence, suspended. And instead, you can give speeches to students in high school about the glories of capitalism. Do that instead. That was the common concern. So how do you persuade jurors, prosecutors, and others to push these cases? The brilliant strategy of the Department of Justice was public procurement first. What were their earlier cases in the 70s where they built a norm? And they brought lots of them. Road paving, but best of all, milk for children's school programs. For breakfast and for lunch, milk, dairies. So here's Bill from the dairy company, and here's the prosecutor. There's Bill. Bill's telling you he's just a humble guy who got trapped in a maelstrom, didn't know what he was doing, and even if it was wrong, you don't want to put him in jail. Take a better look at him. He's taking milk away from your little children who will not have good nutrition, your money. No, he doesn't have a 32 and a ski mask, but he robbed you. He's taking your tax money. Do you like paying taxes, jurors? No. Look at him. From the little children. That's what he did. DOJ starts getting convictions in these cases. Another early case involved bid rigging on the sale of uniforms and shoes to the U.S. military. Here the argument was, your son, your daughter, off in some godforsaken place. You don't see them. They don't have good shoes because of this guy. Somebody sitting in a radar station in the Aleutians where it's really cold in the winter, you know, really cold, 7, 8 degrees. No, 20 or 30 below, really cold. Doesn't have a good coat because of this guy. That's why. Doesn't have blankets. You want to feel sorry for him? You can do it. Guilty. Judge, 3 years. No suspended sentence. No talks to high schools. Nothing like that. So they built a norm of acceptability by bringing lots of these procurement cases where the themes were, it's your money, it's theft, and the harm is great, immediate, and you can understand it right away. And to others, do you know why you're driving on roads that look like the surface of the moon? It's this guy. Because we can't afford better infrastructure because of what he's doing. Jury's convicted. And there was a momentum developed that this was bad behavior. It was a great way to popularize the program because people understood what the misconduct was. This wasn't a merger involving some complicated intermediate industrial input to some larger, more complicated industrial process that ultimately produced a product that you understand. People got it right away, and jurors peered into the souls of these people and said, guilty. Okay, that's why it's a good idea to be active here. Why press collusion cases in an arrangement in an area where when you open the door and you start marching in, you're going to bump into the kinds of unseemly arrangements between private actors and public officials? There is a sign at the frontier that says, landmines. Be careful, because you are tampering with the very forces of evil in the political process, and if you're not careful, you will atone for it. If you plan to upset corrupt bargains, deep-seated, like Fat Leonard's, that was just one, paying off lots of people, if you do this in a serious way, the empire will strike back. The empire does not welcome you and say, you got me. I surrender. I give up all the power I've accumulated. I give up the income stream. It's about time someone found me out. That's not the reaction. People dig in and resist. Indonesia is a good example. The Indonesian Competition Authority, the KPPU, over the past year or so has brought 2 cases involving import cartels. And when they began, they thought they were looking at a straightforward import cartel that restricted shipments into the Indonesian market. Not remarkable. The hang-up was at customs. Part of it was people trying to ship in found that their stuff, the container, just sat there in the holding pen in the customs area. A week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, a month, 6 months, a year. I can't get my stuff out to sell it. Why was that happening? Well, what did the import cartel do? It went to the customs agency and said, we will pay you to let our stuff in and to keep other stuff out, or to let it in and let it sit on the docks. We'll pay you a lot. Although it's interesting, by the way, to see how cheaply some people sell out. In Fat Leonard, naval officers with wonderful careers gave it all up for $10,000 and a great week in Bangkok. It's like going into a bank, in my mind, and going in with the ski mask and the revolver and saying, give me $37. No, give me $37 million. But in this instance, they sold out pretty cheap, but they did. It was the customs agency that was keeping the goods out. They discovered this, and they kept marching along. Well, who was behind the customs agency decision? It was a ministerial decision that said, yes, this will be the favored importer, and we support you. And by the way, if you can share some of what you're getting with us, higher up in the chain, we'll be happy with that. They brought 2 of these cases. This is an embarrassment to the top leadership of the country. And what has the head of state done? He said, I propose to the parliament that we have a reform of the competition law, and we will go through the law, and every place that it mentions the KPPU, they will be excised. We'll take them out of the law. I'll leave the substantive provisions in place, but we are going to eliminate the entire apparatus and machinery for enforcement by the KPPU. The KPPU will disappear. It's gone. What will I do, the president? I will adopt an executive regulation that creates a new competition agency. And who will it work for? Me. They'll be right there where I can see them. I'll pick them, they'll work for me. And that way we won't have these awkward and unfortunate enforcement episodes that we've just had here that tend to be embarrassing. Fortunately, the Indonesian parliament is fond of the competition authority. They like the work they're doing here. They have resisted this. But if you ask the leadership of the KPPU, does this concern you? Yes. This is a shot right at our heads. And we have to frantically work within the limits imposed on us in lobbying our own government, we have to work very hard to make the case to be left where we are. We have friends in the parliament, thank goodness. But the consequence of bringing these two cases involving import cartels, where they thought they were looking at a relatively straightforward collusive scheme to restrict entry, tends to have been motivated ultimately, the cartel, by a corrupt bargain. And by pursuing both of those, they have brought the acrimony of the head of state upon them, who would like to put them out of business. Oh, by the way, does he justify it by saying, you endangered arrangements that my friends in government have liked, that the ministers liked, and I want you to leave them alone? No. This is careless public policy making. It's not coordinated with the larger interests of the government, so we have to control that over time. So if you're going to enter this arena and start dealing with bargains that threaten, if they are upset, existing arrangements that have deep political ties and protection, you're entering a really tough neighborhood. You're going into the box in a soccer match. And when you watch carefully what happens when they go up for a header, a little bit of this, a little bit of that right in the head when nobody's watching. Nothing like getting a shot right to the head there to make you a little bit dizzy and not quite able to, hey, there are 3 balls coming at me. Which one do I hit? It's a real tough game once you start walking into that arena. A second difficulty is, are we for anti-corruption policies? Sure. Do we want aggressive efforts to attack corruption? Yes. Would we be better off if the corruption tax that we pay as citizens shrank? Sure. What happens when you stoke up a big anti-corruption program, partly fueled by the concern with bid rigging? What happens if you really turn up the volume on that system and get a much more powerful vehicle to go after it? There is the Frankenstein's monster problem. And the problem with the monster is the monster starts going around the landscape and throwing the little girl into the pond. The monster starts reaching for everything. A very high-powered, high-octane anti-corruption mechanism, either an inspector general or a prosecutor, starts saying, I'm going to look at them all. I'm going to find corruption everywhere. I think that all government agencies are suspect, and I'm going to overturn every rock to look at every one. I don't care who it is. I'm going to go raid them. I'm going to examine them. My mandate is to go after all of them because this is a sickness that pervades the entire field of public administration, and I've got to go in there and bear down. And the state of mind of the prosecutorial authorities is, I'm going to scour every single element of public administration to go after them. Ukraine. Corruption in Ukraine, well, is there flour and bread? Yeah. In some ways ubiquitous. It's a horrible, horrible legacy of the period of totalitarian control. All kinds of bad habits developed that became so routine that they were thought to almost be official and accepted. Because the way in which you got things done, you went through back doors, you crawled through the windows. The front door was locked. But you found ways to get done what you had to, and it often involved paying people to sell their office to get things done. A deep-seated culture of using payments as a way of getting in the fast track to get done what you wanted to. Ukraine had a period initially with a successful launch of a competition system in the 1990s, then a terrible decline. But 2 years ago, new leadership said, we're going to revive this. Lots of support and encouragement from international organizations like the OECD, like UNCTAD, the European Union. Footnote on Europe, it's astonishing to see how much the gravitational pull of a deeper relationship with the European Union affects governments like this. You could look at Ukraine for a moment and say, hopeless. If you were in the emergency room doing the triage and they bring it in on a pallet, you could say, put that one over there. These will survive. They have a fighting chance, but give them a shot of morphine, but let them go. Not worth our effort. These we can save. You could have said that about Ukraine and say, let it go. It's too hard to fix it, too difficult. But you have a government with some will. They've appointed a good board. They've brought good people in. The odds against them are enormous. And if you were betting at the wagering house of your choice, you'd probably short the stock. You would short the possibility. It's just so hard to do. But there's an agency that's trying to do it. They've tried to make their own operations as clean as they possibly can, good procedures. That's one of the best safeguards you have as an agency. One thing we learned from this whole experience is that if you're going to take shots at these deeply entrenched arrangements, you have to be as clean as you possibly can. Good procedures, no irregularities, document the contacts with the outsiders who might be interested in what you're doing, as well as strong adherence to conflict of interest and other controls on the inside. That is, you don't want to give anyone an excuse to come after you. They will come after you anyway, but you don't want to make it easy for them. So the internal procedural safeguards, ethical commands, those are indispensable if you're going to play in this game, because it is so rough and so difficult. And again, you're endangering income streams, reputations, and power that people treasure, and they don't give it up very easily. So here we have the new agency. It's underway. There is a parallel anti-corruption campaign in Ukraine with a powerful prosecutor with a remit to do all sorts of things. The General Prosecutor's Office, the GPO. During the American Bar Association spring meeting of the antitrust section in Washington this past spring, many public officials are invited. Lots of you have been there in the bar, or as public officials, you've been there, you participated in those programs. One of the attendees is Yuri Yevgenev, who's the chair of the Anti-Monopoly Commission of Ukraine. It's a really nice week for him. He's been on the podium. He's had a chance to do some really interesting things, build some goodwill, talk about his program. It's upbeat and positive. I'm standing with him in the lobby of the Marriott, people coming by saying hello, and buzz, buzz, buzz. Okay, out comes the device. What he has is a short text and a photo of people entering his building. He's being raided. Oh, they waited till he was long gone, out of the country before they did this. Who's coming in the door? These are investigators with military fatigues carrying machine guns. Large numbers of them. Machine guns with no sense of humor. Imagine if you are a junior case handler or a manager, and I come up to Eduardo, and I don't have a pen or paper, but I'm standing there like this. I would be unsettled by that. The agency responded well. What caused it? There was a tip that they had prosecuted a case and imposed a fine that was not strong enough. It involved tobacco, one of the biggest dominant enterprises in the country. They'd imposed the biggest fine that the AMCU had ever imposed, but the claim was they resolved the case this way as a concession to the dominant firm, and it had to be a corrupt bargain because they didn't impose a much bigger fine and greater sanctions. So for a couple of days, the guys with machine guns are running around the offices. Give me your computer. Or what? Very intimidating. Was that specifically a political hit on the AMCU? Maybe not. It is a public prosecutor who's lost any sense of proportion and is being told, it's all bad, it's all corrupt, nothing that happens is happening for a good reason, so if you get a tip, you have to dive in. In life, a lot depends on the dosage. If you have a headache, if you take 2 aspirin, it'll fix your headache. If you swallow the whole bottle, you're dead. And a difficulty in environments that have severe corruption problems historically is that the cure has been to take the whole bottle and to set in motion a process of prosecution and investigation that operates on a hair-trigger basis. And any accusation is a basis to go in, not in a subtle way, saying, knock, knock, we're from the audit group, we're going to come in and do some work. I'm wearing a suit and a tie. I have a portfolio. I'm coming in quietly. Can we have a room to work? I'd like to start talking to the managers. As opposed to walking in the door with machine guns. That is very unsettling for the agency. It also is affecting the way in which agencies in some countries are disposing of cases. Ukraine's another good example. Several of us who were there for a follow-up of a peer review we spent a morning with the agency watching them deliberate on cases. The board, the plenum was meeting on cases, one after another, short presentation, then a resolution. There's always a problem with translation, simultaneous translation. It's such a hard job. The interpretation's difficult. And we wondered in listening here, because the interpreter was sitting with a group of us quietly in a corner trying to tell us what was going on, you think, God, am I picking this up right? But for the most part, our collective view was, these seem to be very mundane matters. These are the sorts of things that we, in settings we're familiar with, we would handle on the paper. You'd pass around a voting note to the board and say, yes, no, maybe, no, 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 done. These would take 2 minutes filling out a form, no, no, no. And we're wondering, why is the board spending a whole morning looking at this handful of obviously insignificant and patently misguided complaints, which they ultimately are dismissing? And we asked afterwards, why are you doing this? Answer, our junior managers are afraid to do it, and individual board members are afraid to do it because the suspicion will be, if you dismiss an open file, that was paid for. That was corrupt. So we, the whole board, collectively have to do this as a way of saying, we mean it, we think it deserves to be dismissed. That's a wonderfully ineffective way to deal with the routine business. And in lots of agencies, that slows them all down because they have to go through a bulletproof procedure to put the imprimatur of the entire board behind a decision to dismiss a seemingly insignificant matter. It means that if you open a file, you're in for a long and difficult journey to dispose of the matter in question. And it meant that when the new team came in, they had files that were 5, 10, 15 years old. Why? Nobody felt comfortable in closing those files. So the docket of work became a set of extras for a zombie movie. They're all dead, but they're still there. And there they sit. And the resources devoted to dealing with the zombies are resources that cannot be devoted to your substantive program. This, again, is a residue of anti-corruption efforts unbounded as a solution to the perceived problem of corruption. This goes back to the problem of distrust. What happens if the infection takes place? The larger public will start to say the whole body's sick. And if that's the perception, you get the full bottle of aspirin, not a couple. The last difficulty is cooperation transactions costs, which has been a theme of discussion. Go back to our first plenary on Wednesday. In most instances, who's going to be involved as you start walking into the corruption area? Yes, it's the competition agency. If it's an administrative agency in the tradition of most civil administrative competition enforcement programs, you can't bring the criminal cases yourself. You're going to have to enlist the work of a public prosecutor. That's one. The public prosecutor, if it does involve corruption, will deal with the anti-corruption office as well. That's two. My experience in government is that just because you have public agencies operating in a similar domain, it does not mean they get along well with each other. This was part of my education going back to the FTC in 2001. We were preparing to do a study involving the IP system. And we met with the Patent and Trademark Office to start planning this and said, this is an opportunity for all of us to consider valuable reforms to the IP system. It's going to make it all work better. Good for you, good for us, good for society, good for competition. You've never seen such a collection of hostile stares. The silence that rebukes you, the silence that screams at you. They gave us all a cold cup of coffee. They pointed us to the parking garage and said, we're finished. But thanks for coming by and do be in touch. That relationship took a long time to develop, and the routine handling of cases involves stunning cooperation costs. Over time, there can be a learning curve and those flatten out a bit, but that's over time. And there's nothing easy, simple, or quick about building the synapses that make this work. That's the cost of doing work in this area. Let me finish with a few suggested solutions, possible solutions. When you look at what jurisdictions are doing broadly to facilitate prosecution involving bid rigging, a number of them have created tripwires that facilitate the prosecution of cases. And one of the most important is what is often called the Certificate of Independent Pricing Determination. What's that? I take a piece of paper. You're providing a tender. And I say, I want you to look at this and sign this for me. What does the top say? It says, simply put, I determine my price by myself and not with anybody else. I determine the terms on which I'm going to tender by myself and not by anybody else. This bid was prepared by me alone, not in consultation with anyone else. Translation, I didn't collude. I did it alone. The bottom says, the failure to truthfully provide this certificate is a criminal offense. It is lying to the government. It is a false statement. And if you knew at the time you signed this document, and by the way, who signs? High-level government official, high-level company official, along with the person who prepared the bid. If this isn't right, it's a criminal offense. So when you do the prosecution, if you find the real cartel, you've got them right away with this piece of paper. You lied. You knew it was a collusive scheme. You lied. I don't have to talk about effects. I don't have to talk about any number of other subtle issues. I've got you right here. Indeed, in some ways, I don't even have to bring the cartel offense case because I got you right here. Certificate of Independent Pricing Determination. And it does have the effect of causing procurement officials in companies to pause a moment before they sign that. Because the letter at the bottom, the language says, it's a crime if you're lying to us, but it's a pleasure doing business with you. Thank you for your interest in public procurement. Bounties. Some procurement systems will pay informants part of what the government recovers if it wins. In response to one of the many recurring procurement scandals we have in the United States, the Congress of the United States in the mid-1980s dramatically enhanced a much older mechanism to provide rewards to informants. It says this: if you give us information that helps us identify an illegal scheme to steal money from the government, we'll give you some, up to 35% of what we get. If you are deeply involved yourself, we will bring that down, but generally not to zero, to something like 4, 5, or 6%. What have been the biggest rewards so far? I think the largest for an individual was $256 million US for one informant. It was a fraudulent scheme involving the National Health Care Plan for senior individuals, Medicare. It was a company that was submitting 2 invoices for every procedure that it performed. 1 procedure, 2 invoices. This person inside the company was in the accounting department and innocently went to a superior and said, as far as I can tell, we did this once, but we billed them twice. It's an error. Yes, it could be, but we've done it thousands of times. It's a computer problem. Yes, but all of our computers seem to be doing this. Don't worry about it. Well, he did. The mechanism provides that you can hire a lawyer who will represent you. If you recover, the bad guys pay the lawyer's bills. The lawyer also will be able to guide you through the mechanism. There's an anti-retaliation mechanism, but the rewards are set high enough so that you will have a pension, basically. it anticipates that you're not going to be hired in this sector again. Hi, I'm leaving my employer. What was your main accomplishment with your previous employer? I turned them in. They paid a big fine and many of them are in jail, but I'd love to work for you. You will be radioactive. You won't have a chance to do this in the future. It's deliberately designed at a high level. The US government recovers billions of dollars every year through this mechanism involving the procurement system. It's been used, it is applicable to bid rigging on government contracts. It's been used a few times there. But the notion of it is that someone who's inside who sees it will get a reward. Now, in a sense, leniency is a reward system, isn't it? You tell me, I give you a dispensation from punishment, sometimes a pretty sweeping dispensation. This is another form of payment. The mechanism in the US is called the Civil and Criminal False Claims Act. It's created a significant bar of people. They have meetings like this, to people who represent whistleblowers. And they discuss the science of representing whistleblowers in these kinds of cases. One way to augment the existing mechanism is to tell people, we will pay you. In the words of the statute, we will pay a rogue to catch a rogue. And the payments are set pretty high. Better operations research. This is what competition agencies could do more with the body of cartels they have and with past experience. It's striking to me how little effort public agencies do to provide an amalgam, a composite of all the cartels they're seeing. That is, what is the history of cartel enforcement that we have? How did it happen? Who did it? How did it take place? And to go to public procurement authorities and say, you should do the same thing. If you're noticing in recurring bidding episodes a consistent pattern in who wins, a consistent pattern of who gets subcontracts, that is not cosmic fate or mere chance. That's a deliberate scheme. How do we know? Well, some researchers have gone back and read all of the accounts of past cartels. Two researchers, one at Penn State, one at Duke, Bob Marshall, Leslie Marks. The best book on collusion ever written in the modern era, 2012, The Economics of Collusion, MIT Press. Bob and Leslie did what lawyers won't do. They went back and read all of those decisions. They read them all, especially the European Union decisions, the European Commission decisions, which in the old days, before the shortcut settlement procedure, used to have rich, detailed statements of how the cartel worked. As great literature, these are terrible decisions. There are no jokes. There are no pictures. They're mind-numbingly bad, written in the commission speak of the commission. It was found in this instance that, oh God, passive voice again, a 40-word long sentence, spare me God, don't do this. I will reform my life if I don't have to read these. It's why many people don't read them very often, but Bob and Leslie read every one. What did they extract from them? I wonder who teaches these guys to write, by the way. I'm afraid they're taken to a room and told, there's a little bit of humanity and clarity. If you wring that out of this, we'll let you work here. But Bob and Leslie read them all. And what they did is they noticed there's certain recurring patterns in how cartels form and operate. And they extracted from it a very detailed and informative deconstruction of what cartels do. As I've told some of you, this looks a little bit like a book about how to make an atomic bomb. If I was setting up a cartel, I'd read this book very carefully. But it's mainly aimed for the enforcement officials. This is what to look for. And here are the data sets you want to maintain to look for patterns that will be very informative in looking at the next one. What I would also like to see as part of this, someday as part of settlement discussions with firms, is for compliance. If you want to build a compliance program that I will respect, when this happens, you are going to do an internal assessment that tells me why this happened. I'm partly shaped here by my experience years ago with a law firm working for a company then known as McDonnell Douglas. I worked on lots of their commercial aviation and military aviation programs. The commercial aviation work mainly involved representing Lloyd's of London, which is the insurance carrier for McDonnell Douglas at the time. Airline crashes. What is the standard practice? There is a careful, detailed review to find out why it happened exactly what happened as a way of not letting it happen again. I'd like to see more of that in our field. I don't want you to just tell me, sorry, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I'm really sorry about this. I wish it didn't happen. He said, I understand that, but how did it happen? How did the cartel start? Oh, rogue manager. What you see in these efforts to construct a detailed profile of cartels in chemicals, in auto parts, man, there must have been a lot of rogue managers running around. It wasn't a rogue manager. It was a deliberate decision taken at more senior levels of the company to do this. And I want you to tell me how that happened and what you're going to do to fix it so it doesn't happen the next time. I want accident reconstructions so that we avoid this accident in the future. And if you do that, I will respect your compliance program. If you can show me that that's happened and you share me that information. Because that will be informative to me about what to look at in the future, but it will be your demonstration of sincerity that you want to fix this. And no, I don't want to hear about your videos, your little comic books for senior managers, how many lectures you've given to them. In the words of Amy Winehouse, no, no, no. I'm not interested in that. I want to know systematically and institutionally what you are doing to put inside safeguards, whether it's your board, whether it's what your head of legal services inside does. I want you to find out how this happened. And if you say rogue, I'm going to say go back to work. But if you do this, I'll respect your compliance program. And by the way, I think this is a way to get real compliance because you will know why you got sick. And how it happened, and how incentives created at the top may have influenced people. Better operations research, deeper international cooperation. We've talked about that this week. You have, in many ways, individual hospitals, their competition systems around the world. One of my colleagues, David Hyman, explains to me, David's a medical doctor and he's a lawyer. He's a real doctor. And he says, in medicine, how did the state of the art in medicine improve over time? How did it get better? Pooling information. If you have a cardiology department in your hospital and you do heart surgery, you learn a lot. You study very carefully pre-operation diagnosis, surgical technique in the operating theater, and post-operative care. And you assemble that body of information, you see what works, how it worked, and you improved. Imagine what you can do if you take the experience base of one hospital and you join it up with others, and that's happened. So that you don't have a single hospital looking at its own data and experience, it's going down the learning curve looking at thousands of hospitals, looking at what was done over time. This kind of operations research could be done across agencies so that we know more broadly what's taking place, because look at how many of the cartels are operating in lots of countries. And I want to pose the same question to the business officials. Why? How did this happen? And what are you going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again? And last, international institutions do have a positive role to play here. This is not a complete cure by any means, but there is a power of peer review and international views and perspectives. In a benign way, in a helpful way, look how helpful it was in the reform of the Brazilian law in this decade, but also in this instance, how it is possible in the course of building a program for international organizations to look at the competition agency and say this is worthwhile, to assist them in dealing with the backlash that sometimes takes place. And in particular, for international organizations that give money, the international donor banks, to be a little bit more aggressive in looking at how their money's spent. Now, there's a problem if you're a major donor. Instead of just being a donor, you start to see yourself as, to look at the language, a partner. I'm a partner with the country. We are working together on this. What happens if your partnership involves manifestly corrupt projects? Your reaction might be outrage. You've wasted your money. You've tarnished my reputation. I'm going to bore in on this to make sure that you don't get a dime until this gets fixed. That's one way to look at it. The other way is, oh my God, I'm going to get blamed for this too. This is my project. It's our project. We're endangered. And in a number of instances, the major donors drag their feet in really focusing in the way they might on some of these projects, including those that are financing them and ought to be absolutely determined to make sure the money's used well. In many instances, they have a habit of looking obliquely the other way. They have a lot of leverage. They have a lot of force. It could be used more effectively this way. So, car wash, really big deal. Huge deal. Big deal yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Astonishing case. Public procurement worth the scrutiny? No doubt about it, for all kinds of reasons. Maybe most of all, the trust that the public resides in government or takes away. Worth doing, yes. Can competition law make contributions? No doubt. Hard to do? Extremely hard to walk into this area because it is so fraught with political hazards, with corruption programs, well-minded, that tend to be a little bit excessive in their tendency to scour everything instead of using a more nuanced approach. And an agency has to reflect upon this and contemplate this. And by the way, other agencies around the world, when they read about raids, it's sobering. I've talked to a number of officials who think about the anti-corruption programs in other countries, heads of agencies who say, I'm not interested in doing that right now. I'd rather pick other cases. I'd rather look someplace else. I just don't want that. I don't want the Frankenstein's monster coming to visit me. I'd rather look in another direction. There are other good things to do. I'll do those. I won't take this on. And of course, the difficulties in building good cooperative frameworks. The good cooperation, as we said already this week, takes a long time. That's a slow growth. That's a process of building trust and confidence across the agencies over time. Again, those connections tend to be difficult to build and they're fragile. But without them, you don't get the cooperation needed to make things work over time. And yes, there are the things we can add to the mix, maybe to make the program more effective. Worth doing, hard to do, arguably as important as anything else that a competition agency can do. And again, the program here, I'd say, as important as any case in the world today. Thank you.